Hello, and welcome to our special edition of the Keeping It 100 podcast. I am Damon Naylor, your host, and I'm the NAFCM media guru, and I'm joined by my partner and co-host, DG Mon, the president of NAFCM. We are going to speak with a special guest who has received some funding from AAA-ICDR and NAFCM to support mediation focusing on issues related to the LA fires. And our special guest for today is Zoe Hernandez with LA County. Hey, Zoe.
Hi, Damon. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you, and we're excited to hear about your story. So, of course, we discussed previously about you saying yes to participating in the LA Fire Support Grant. So now we want to know what has happened since you said yes and share some of your experiences, your heartfelt stories of what's going on since then.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, since the Loyola Center for Conflict Resolution said yes to participating in the grant through NAFCM, we've had a number of different fire-related cases come in. Even some of them have just been referrals, but we found a lot of people to be affected by the fires in various different ways. We've had, even family-related cases, divorce cases. We had a divorce between a firefighter and his ex-spouse. He was really concerned about calculating what was a really crazy year for him in terms of his overtime income that he worked. And so, working something out and negotiating something that they felt was fair was really interesting, an interesting new challenge that not many people knew about. We had, I think, one intake, somebody came into our office and said that they were very fearful of how vulnerable they felt since losing their job in the fires. She was a house cleaner at a house in the Palisades, and she lost her job because the house was gone. And she was also undocumented, as many of the people working out there are. And now she just has all day to worry and be out and about. And she wanted, help. And very often, we as community mediators, when we do an intake with somebody, we just listen more than anybody else would, right? We're not evaluating them for a case or legal claim. And so I think it helped her a lot just to be listened to, and to be understood. We also have had many landlord-tenant cases of people whose homes were damaged in the fires. They needed to do temporary remediation. We've seen a lot of that. I think one of the most difficult cases we saw was between a landlord and a tenant who the landlord rented out a small unit, maybe a duplex or fourplex multifamily home, and he lived in one of the units and was evicting the neighboring tenant without cause, which is allowed, but is a different type of eviction. And the tenant was upset, understandably, and was very fearful and assumed it was for a variety of reasons, economic, retaliatory. And when we were able to go and speak with the landlord, it was the tenant who called us. The landlord let us know that their family member lost their home in the fire. They wanted to be able to provide that home to them. And I could just imagine the kind of pressure that he was under to help a family member in that sort of situation. People tell you, oh, blood is thicker than water, you got to do this. And I think that's why I really realized mediation is maybe a good tool for natural disaster situations, because there is kind of this bad guy that's really none of the players. It's just kind of happened to everyone, and everybody's kind of in a hard place. I think those are, some of the stories that, that really come to mind for me, since we said yes and started taking on these cases.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing those specific stories and examples. And I'm going to pitch it to my partner DG to see if he has any questions for you.
I think that's absolutely beautiful, Zoe, that there really is no bad guy. There's people in a variety of different stressors that are going on. How do you help people see that when they're ready to see that?
Oh, it's a good question. You know, I think because we're a third party neutral, sometimes you can just acknowledging to people like that you're really between a rock and a hard place right now, aren't you? Just telling people that and just letting them hear it and, go, yeah, I really am. Other times I'll sort of state back to people as neutrally as possible, their position and the other person's position kind of all at once and sort of state, well, I understand you feel that I think what I'm seeing is you feel this and they feel this and they're seeing this and you're seeing that. To sort of just lay out everything. Let's just visualize sort of what's going on each side. When people get really stuck on, which I have seen many times when somebody kind of is going, well, I know they want me to, you know, do X, do Y, do Z. But the thing is, I'm in the right. Okay, yeah. You can kind of go, well, they think they're in the right because of this, and you think you're in the right because of this. I think you know, saying that and then also just pointing out what they agree on, what they have in common. So in the case of the fire, you know, just talking about how the fire affected both of them, how it happened, just talking about the common ground that they both inherently stand on. We see that a lot, right? They are both sharing a situation, the conflict that they're in. So those are kind of the things that I see the most.
As you encountered people and they shared their stories like that about how the fire has impacted them, is there any particular story that stands out for you that you still carry in your memory from hearing someone else and their experience of being alone, their experience of loss?
I think when one of my cohort members and I, Julie, were able to go to Altadena and speak with people out there, the way they spoke about the loss, I think, was very enlightening, really illuminating. Their community, the community that they had and they lost, and they were really determined to preserve. I know one woman talked about she was living on her land with an RV because she can't afford to rebuild, and she doesn't want to let go of the land because, she wants to keep that community alive. And it's so difficult, to see a lot of things bought up. Even if your house is still there, all your neighbors' houses are gone. I think that has been really impactful for me. I mean, and just the degree to which it's popped up a little bit everywhere, even when maybe the overall case isn't about, a dispute between, let's say, a remediation company and a customer or a contractor and someone who's lost their home and is rebuilding, just, the fact that I'm mediating a guardianship case and somebody has to change their address because in addition to taking care of a child in a guardianship, they got displaced and they're relocated now. Or one of the first cases I had actually, there was a woman who her what was it? She had an apartment and her sister had been living in it under her lease, and her sister passed away and she wanted to move back in because she lost her home in the Palisades. And the landlord didn't want to let her because there was a dispute over who was the actual tenant. And so while the dispute was who's on the lease, the only reason it was really happening was because she didn't have a place to go anymore. And I remember it was very hard to explain, like the landlord's attorney didn't understand why this woman whose original address had been in the Pacific Palisades was fighting him on moving into what he described as like this kind of dinky, shabby apartment. And she was like, I don't have somewhere else to go anymore. Like, I need this. Yeah, all these kinds of situations that we never really expected to see.
Zoe, I had one final question for you. Do you have a particular example of an obstacle or challenge you guys have faced during this process?
I would say, I think, just educating people on mediation and what it can do. And I think, getting the word out there about community mediation and how it can help. I think that's probably the number one challenge. And I think that's both with the average person, but I think it's also with, organizations. I think organizations aren't really set up for our process sometimes. I think they're more set up for, maybe a formal litigation process or something else, right? So, maybe the average person doesn't know how mediation can help. Um, or an organization, you call them or you try to contact them and they say, who's your client? Well, we weren't served anything. And you try to explain, no, 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 no. We just want to talk, things like that, right? So that maybe they're not quite set up. Or if you try to talk to or try to get an audience with a government agency to, lend help, maybe people are sometimes unsure because there are so many lawyer advertisements trying to get class members or other types of things, trying to offer, support or recovery related to the fires, remediation companies. This is something that, to digress a tiny bit back to where we were, we saw a little bit of an issue where after disasters, sometimes there are companies who do remediation who will, I think there's some way of finding like where the fire department has been deployed, or maybe they just went through neighborhoods, I don't know. And they will come by and try to get you to sign a contract for remediation services immediately. And we had a woman call in and ask to try and get her out of this contract with the remediation company, and she let us know my husband signed this with these people. I think he thought they were our insurance company. He doesn't speak English, and I don't think the people that came by spoke the language that he speaks. There are a lot of interesting stories like this, but there are a lot of things like that. When you're trying to coordinate with things that are, totally different systems and processes, I think, informing people of what we are, how we work, and how we fit in. I think that's the big obstacle.
Well, great job, Zoe. We appreciate you for coming on. And look, we love the hard work and the heart work that you guys are doing for your community, and I appreciate everything that you guys are doing and being a blessing there. And like I said, we thank you for coming on our special edition of the Keeping It 100 podcast. And thanks so much for your story. DG, you had something?
Amen to everything you just said, brother. It's all wonderful.
Appreciate you. Thank you.